Where's the fire? We're not even halfway through Luke's gospel yet. So why the urgency? The cross was getting closer, but Jesus' time had not yet come. By this time, Jesus had already shared the news of his impending suffering, rejection, betrayal, death, and resurrection with his disciples, not once, but twice. But they did not understand. In fact, its meaning was concealed from them. So what's the rush anyway? Best to slow down, to take a deep breath. But instead of calming things down, Jesus stirred things up all the more. And I'm not quite sure what to make of it. Today's gospel lesson makes me squirm. It makes me uneasy. How about all of you? All of a sudden, things heat up. What does it mean that Jesus set his face to go to Jerusalem, but that he had made up his mind? But isn't that where he was headed all along from get-go? And while his time was getting closer, his time had not yet come. Still, for whatever reason, it seems there was no time to be dilly-dallying around, no time to waste, no time for distractions, no time for seesawing or indecision or excuses or procrastination. James and John, they weren't indecisive. They didn't procrastinate. They took matters into their own hands. The Samaritans' rejection of Jesus ignited what appears to be a short fuse within them. Did they really have the power to command fire to come down from heaven and destroy those Samaritans? Well, Elijah did it, so I guess they thought they could too. James and John flexed their muscles, ready to ignite a fire, and what did Jesus do? He quickly put it out. He rebuked them, reminding them who was in charge. What do you think about that word rebuke? I don't like it much. It's pretty powerful. And surely no one likes being rebuked, especially not by Jesus. And just like that, they move on to another village. No time to dilly-dally around. It was time for them to move on. Still, I can't help but wonder if James and John gave up that easily. Do you suppose they shook the dust off their feet as a testimony against the Samaritans before they left town? After all, Jesus instructed them to do this earlier, should they encounter resistance. Whether the Samaritans received Jesus or not, the kingdom of God had come near to them. You see, the coming of God's kingdom doesn't depend on our human response. God's kingdom comes. Still, it seems to me that there's something missing in these verses. And I was delighted to find that indeed there is something missing. There's a footnote that suggests part of the verse is missing. According to another ancient authority, after rebuking James and John, Jesus said to them, "You do not know what spirit you are of, for the Son of Man has not come to destroy the lives of human beings, but to save them." Good news. Jesus saved the lives of the Samaritans that day. Whose lives would Jesus save when he got to Jerusalem? The urgency in the first half of today's gospel lesson carries on to the second half. Just as there was urgency in Jesus setting his face to go to Jerusalem, so too there is urgency in following Jesus. But we can't help but wonder, what's the rush? There's plenty of time, right? Why the urgency? Why the fire? There's always tomorrow. But Jesus makes it clear to us there's no time for us to waste. If we think James and John's words in the first half of today's gospel reading are challenging, I think that Jesus' words in the second half to the three would-be followers are equally as challenging. Interesting that these three are referred to as would-be followers. So my question is, did they ever follow? And who are they? Might they be you and me? As I picture this first would-be follower, I see Jesus on the move, and on his way to another village, bypassing altogether the Samaritan village that wouldn't receive him, wouldn't welcome him. His face set on Jerusalem, and I see this would-be follower coming alongside of Jesus, keeping stride with him, talking with him along the way. It reminds me of another road and another journey, and that of Emmaus. For you see, I think this disciple's heart was burning within him as surely as the disciples on the road to Emmaus, their hearts were burning. This would-be follower voiced his commitment. He boldly said, "I will follow you wherever you go." He was ready to follow Jesus. Or was he? Lest he thought this would be easy, Jesus made it very clear that following him requires not only commitment, but also sacrifice. What are we willing to give up? And when we follow Jesus, we also risk being rejected as he was. And I wonder if Jesus scared this would-be follower off. Did he have second thoughts? Did he say, maybe another time, maybe later, or forget it altogether? Or did he say, I'm all in? Well, as Jesus continued on his way, before reaching the next village, he said to another man, Jesus spoke first this time, he said, "Follow me." How do we hear that? As an invitation or a command? If we look in the Greek, it's actually a command. But the man had something important to do first before he could or he would commit to following Jesus. And to us it sounds urgent, but truly we don't really know. Had this man's father just died? Or if he hadn't died, was he near death? Or could it be that his father was aging, but still quite healthy? Like the third would-be follower, this man asked to put his house in order first. To us, this seems like a reasonable request. Surely Jesus would not deny that, but he does. And I've tried to soften Jesus' response as I've wrestled to understand. One thing is certain, there's no way that we can escape the urgency in this text, the urgency of following Jesus. So what does it mean? What does it mean to follow Jesus? Following Jesus isn't about convenience. In fact, it's more about the interruptions, or we might even call them disruptions, in our already all too busy life. Like the would-be follower in today's gospel reading, we're inclined to say, let me finish this first, and then I will. Following Jesus is about loving one another when it's convenient and when it isn't. And truth be told, we cannot, by our own willpower or might, follow Jesus. We need God's help. And so when we're asked here in worship to commit to something, we say, we will, and we ask God to help and guide us. So I still wonder, where's the good news in today's gospel reading? In that footnote, right, that I said? But I think the good news is actually found in the urgency, the very thing that makes me squirm and uncomfortable. And I share with you the words of Pastor David Lose because I think he says it so well. He writes, Jesus is in a hurry to get to Jerusalem to die for sinners like James and John, and I would add, like you and me. He set his face for the cross in order to redeem those who can always think of just one more thing they should do before heeding Jesus' call to love each other. Empathetic or not, self-righteous or not, too busy or cool for God or not, Jesus comes for all. End quote. This good news, it burns like fire within us, and it speaks to us until our hearts are stirred. And we are sent out to live out this good news as we follow God's call to ventures of which we cannot see the ending, by paths yet untrodden, through perils unknown. And still we go out in urgency, with courage, not knowing where we go, but knowing and trusting who we follow, for it is his hand that leads us, and it is his love that supports us wherever we go. Amen.